A very good afternoon to the Sportsfan radio panel. We're back on air with show number 486 and a very special guest today, Dr. Alan Pearce. Good afternoon, Dr. Pearce.
G'day. Al's fine, or Alan, not a problem. Yeah.
No worries, Alan. Let me just introduce you first. Adjunct professor at La Trobe University with a focus on sports-related concussion.
Yep.
You're also the Victorian manager of the Australian Sports Brain Bank. And therefore, I would imagine that you'd have a fair bit of discussion with Professor Michael Buckland, who's also been on our program recently.
That's right. Yes, Michael and I talk every day. That's how big this issue is.
Well, we see it as a huge issue. And what's prompted me getting you on the program today is the announcement during the week that Heather Anderson, who'd played rugby league and also AFLW for the Adelaide Crows, it was discovered that after a post-mortem that she's the first female athlete to be diagnosed with CTE. How does that change the landscape with respect to introducing women into the discussion where it hasn't really been before?
Well, I guess it's something that, we've almost been expecting since the introduction of professional women's sport, and I don't mean that in any sort of disrespectful way, but historically men have been contact sports have been biased towards predominantly male competitors, going back through the decades and even centuries, but in the last sort of 20 to 30 years, we've seen the rise of contact sports for women in soccer, rugby, and more recently in Australian rules football. And so for us, it has been a matter of time. As you said with Michael, we started the Brain Bank in 2018. So to be able to announce our first case of a female athlete with CTE is actually a lot quicker than what we expected. But in the bigger picture, it's not to be expected.
I read the quote from Professor Buckland's report that said there were multiple CTE lesions in the brain of Heather Anderson, as well as abnormalities everywhere he looked in her cortex. That can't be good news for women and men who've been engaged in contact sports since they were young, because I read that she'd been playing contact sports since she was 5 years of age.
That's right. So what it's telling us is that CTE is really about a disease of exposure. So in the paper that we published, it was reported that Heather had one concussion, a diagnosed concussion, possibly 4 others, but even then in a 18-year career, 5 concussions. This is clearly telling us that this issue is not about concussion per se, but rather the exposure to repetitive head trauma, the collisions, the tackles, the bumps, the going to ground. And this comes off the back of a paper that was published by our colleagues at Boston University about 2 weeks prior, clearly showing the exposure of repetitive head trauma in American footballers was really strongly associated with the risk of CTE.
Hi, good afternoon, Alan. I'll never forget first hearing about the NFL, which is a sport I love, but the helmet-to-helmet impact. Someone much more qualified than me said it's like a mini car crash, and you think that that's happening 100 times a game. They used to celebrate by hitting helmets together. I'm pretty sure that's stopped now. But do you agree that that's a certain brain risk, that helmet-to-helmet impact? And the irony of the helmet's supposed to save you or protect you.
Yeah, well, helmets is one of the biggest myths around in both concussion and CTE, and I am going to try and separate the two because inevitably we mix concussion and CTE risk up, and so helmets. Every time I speak, whether it's podcasting or on mainstream media or whatever, inevitably the comments come back, well, if they only wore helmets, they'd be fine, and we have decades of research to show that helmets do not protect the brain from movement and forces impacting on the brain tissue. So helmets will protect your skull bone from fractures and lacerations. And, if anyone was watching the Tour de France last night, Mark Cavendish went down. Wear a helmet. absolutely might have protected him from a skull fracture, but it certainly would. It doesn't. Helmets don't protect the brain tissue from moving, and that's our concern for CTE, is that constant impact, either directly or indirectly, that moves the brain tissue, then starts to cause micro damage, is what Michael Buckland has probably talked to you about, and that releases this protein called tau, and then that starts to become toxic to the brain cells.
Mm. Right.
Alan, that tau, is that only detectable post-mortem, or can it be detected before someone dies?
Well, at the moment, it's really, I mean, for CTE in particular, is only detectable post-mortem. There is some research trying to look at detecting this tau protein in living people, and again, Boston University are leading the way on this, and they're still struggling to show this sort of spread of this tau using positron emission tomography, or PET scanning. And what they do is they inject a radioactive isotope that then supposed to bind with this protein, and then it shows up on the brain where it is. And at the moment, it's still not that successful. But in Alzheimer's research and diagnosis, they're getting a little bit better at that, but only in advanced cases. So the problem is can we detect it in early stage? Because that's where we could possibly bring in some form of treatments or something to at least extend quality of life, because we know that it's an incurable neurodegenerative disease. So once it starts, unfortunately, that's it.
Gee. Alan, I've heard you speak before, and we've had the good Professor Buckland on the show, and I've heard him speak elsewhere. It must be getting to you guys like Groundhog Day, because when you come on to most shows, not ours, but other shows, you got to start all over again, and it's sort of, and the commentators are all, bugger me, what, concussion is not CTE, CTE is not concussion.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Not positive. Gee, that's what a surprise. Helmets, aren't they doing any good? And that's bad enough.
Yeah.
But I think the AFL are just, and I suspect NRL, and I suspect the boxing authorities, and I notice in Scotland they've stopped heading balls up under 12. So, but the authorities in sport are also taking the all bugger me approach, which is it's always a new surprise for them. Well, it's not a surprise for them, and the authorities know this stuff. And if they don't know, well, bloody listen to Sportsfan Radio or listen to you. It must frustrate you. And where do you think we should go in terms of the authorities?
Yeah, look, absolutely. I've been involved in this area of research for about 15 years now. So I actually started sort of back in 2009, 2010, and trying to sort of get the ball rolling. And I guess the first sort of major breakthrough was in 2012 when we did a program with showing Greg Williams was struggling on Sunday night. And sort of ever since then, I've been, sort of trying to warn, I guess, that the day is coming when we are going to get cases of CTE. And back in 2012, and I still have the clipping because it's one of the clippings that I use to keep myself motivated, is that in the Age, the then chief medical officer said, we will never see a case of CTE in Australian rules football because this is an American disease and this is completely different sport to American football. And so I just found that quite disbelieving that just sort of brushed off when I was seeing, all sorts of problems from a physiological perspective, because I'm a physiologist and Michael's a pathologist. But what happens is that what I find is that every time that we talk about this, the sports, and I'll use them all collectively, will spin this issue into, oh, well, we've addressed the problem. We have our concussion policy. We now have a 12-day stand down rule, or 11 days if you're in, rugby. And there's nothing more to see here. And when we talk about CTE, which is not related to concussion, they then spin it back to concussion. And, the mainstream media don't have, I guess they don't, whether they have enough time to actually investigate a bit more or fact check a little bit more, but we'll strengthen that spin by talking about concussion. If you're on TV, and I've just, we've got another one today with kids and concussions, they'll talk about the big hit and they'll show the big hit, and everyone just assumes that CTE risk is based on those big hits. And so it gets lost in this conversation. And when you talk to people, generally, and say, for example, with Heather Anderson, she only had one recorded concussion. They look at you like, what? I thought this was about concussion. I said, no, it's about exposure to repeated head trauma and starting young. And she started at 5, as you said.
If you are an authority in a sport that is contributing materially to the poor health outcomes of many of the participants in the sport, and you take that attitude, and that attitude I noted from the 730 report in America, one of the experts was saying it was like big tobacco, that they just kept on putting it back onto us and saying, oh, the research is wrong, or the research is irrelevant, the game is fine. Yeah. I think that is abhorrent behaviour. Would you agree with that? It's at that level of the authorities?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, this is on the public record anyway, and I'm happy to send you some links to a few stories. But essentially, because I've spoken out, I've been cancelled. Essentially, my research has been disparaged. I've been discredited by many academics. My position as a professor at La Trobe is only honorary. So I can't get funding. It is very tough, because when you do speak out and you speak up and you talk, try and blow the whistle on issues, you become, I feel like become the enemy of sport. And you find that the sports will fund those that are behaving themselves.
Well, Alan, that abhorrence then applies to the media, because the media keep supporting the AFL. Gorgeous Gil McLaughlin will never talk badly of the dangers of the game, I presume, because it's a bad look for the league, a league which is very, very keen to sponsor The Voice, very keen to sponsor LGBTQI issues, and to the extent I don't, that's fine, but something that actually goes to the well-being, health, and even survival of some people being ignored, I just think it's it's abhorrent, and really something should be done about it. What that is, I'm not exactly sure, but
yes, it is interesting, isn't it, that these sports are more than happy to engage with the mainstream media on issues around social issues and putting their a position on a whole range of other things too, talking about how this is such a good thing for physical and mental health. But as soon as you mention the C word, either concussion or CTE, doesn't matter, they're both C, it's complete silence.
Can I get your thoughts? I'm the rugby league columnist here. We were actually accused of overkill and hysteria early in the season due to the introduction of a doctor who wasn't even in the same stadium or often in the same state, who would be watching the vision and looking for signs of concussion, and the player would get a tap on the head and off they'd go. Can I surmise from what you said earlier is it's not about the big hits. So if someone's showing concussion, that might be good in terms of management of concussion, but it certainly wouldn't assist in CTE, having someone in another state looking to see if there's any instant reactions to a tackle.
Oh, look, I mean, we've done, I've done research putting sensors on player heads and mouth guards, and it's not uncommon for players to be getting reasonable hits of 20 to 30 Gs, maybe up to 100 Gs, but more often 20 to 30 Gs dozens of times per match. Now, we're not even talking about what impacts could be happening in training, but even if we just took 20 to 30 hits at 20 to 30 Gs per match per season, and multiply that over the number of seasons, it starts to build up. And that's not picked up by independent doctors because there's no signs or symptoms. All they're doing is looking at, is there a sign, the kind of concussion spotting. But, as you mentioned about NRL, I mean, it was a couple of months ago now, where we actually discovered that the independent doctor really wasn't an independent doctor, but rather just a concussion spotter. So had no diagnostic capacity to say that player is concussed, they need to come off. And that sort of blew up around Origin 1 time, whether they, were able to play Origin 1 and conveniently was able to appeal the concussion diagnosis and won. And so Turbo, I'm trying to think of his name. He's got that sort of
Tom Trebojevic.
I can't say his surname. Apologies.
No,
he got.
I'll
to
get
play.
you to spell it in a second. Sorry.
Yeah. He got to play. And again, I spoke up, and it got into the Daily Telegraph, and I was sort of completely, pariah that I speak up about player health. He ended up doing his shoulder, because we know that if people are concussed, their risk of musculoskeletal injury goes up 2.5 to 3 times.
Okay.
It's a sad state of affairs, Alan, when the AFL listened to Richard Gordoy and Gil McLachlan about safety and health issues, because they are responsible for the safety and health of all the players, and they don't listen to you. And don't listen to Professor Michael Buckland. And I just think this is a horrible state of affairs.
Well, again, this is all in the public domain, but, I haven't had full-time employment since 2015.
And what do you put that down to?
Speaking up against the organisation, and I've been accused of brand damaging. I've been accused of being controversial. I've been accused of, destroying football. You name it, I've been called it.
I did read during the week that Richard Gordoy's nickname is Over to You, Gil, which I found quite amusing. That's what club chiefs call him anyway. It seems a lot of people don't want to step up and own this issue. And as you say, anyone that says it's not about large, severe knocks to the head, it's more about sustained, continued, repetitive impacts. It's almost the climate change type argument. It's almost you're going against everyone.
Dr. Gelding here. I played cricket for many, many years and opening the batsman many times before helmets were even introduced. And it was part of the genre that you just wore it when you got hit, and you kept on going on. And if you went off, it seemed a bit weak. It's always amazed me, soccer, and especially so with CTE, which you haven't done. Kids from young as 10, and I played with a lot of English guys and things like that. They play a lot of soccer, and they were always hitting the ball up against their head. It always wondered to me, is soccer a game where there's more CTE injuries that are shown later after death than, say, some of the other sports like AFL and things like that? Or because that with that head and the ball always hitting, there's that constant shake and rattle of the brain.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not, from what I've seen in the research, part of the problem with the research at the moment is that it's still very limited. But we're certainly seeing in the research with soccer that there is, risk of CTE, but also risk of Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, and motor neuron disease. So colleagues in Scotland back in about 2019 did a really huge study looking at the data in the Scottish population, and this talks to why they've banned heading for kids under 12 under, and they found that the soccer cohort that they got from the medical records were 3 to 5 times higher for dementia, Parkinson's, and motor neuron disease. In Italy, there are clusters of retired soccer players now with higher rates of motor neuron disease. We see this everywhere. That neurodegenerative disease is resulting from that repetitive impacts from the head.
And they would have been doing it from young ages.
That's
where
right.
it was encouraged, where you get this cause and effect
Yes,
type
that's right.
of thing. Yeah.
I mean, what I do, in my research as a physiologist, we do some, sounds really strange, but it's not. I stimulate brains in living people, and I can look at their response. And, I have we have colleagues around the world doing similar things. And what they found was that even just after 20 headers, so just doing 20 headers like you do in a practice, that can disrupt brain functioning for 24 hours.
Yeah. And you'd imagine over in England, the wet, heavy balls and,
that's right.
Yeah.
They have talked about that. And that's interesting that you talk about, how the sports here spin things. In the UK, they had been spinning that going, well, in the olden days, they were the heavy leather ball, and so whereas now they've got the lighter ball. The issue is, and I'm going to sound a little bit nerdy here, but, you got force equals mass times acceleration. So going back to your high school physics, back in the day, the mass of the ball was heavier. They went a bit slower, but the force was still there. Now the mass is lighter, but they accelerate faster. So the force is still there. But it's still the same, despite what people want to say.
Alan, sorry, John, can I just finish on the thing? With the Women's World Soccer Cup coming up, it's going to be all in the headlines and things like that. Again, you'll have your concussions and that, but I suppose where we're talking separately CTE, would you be able to see some kind of knocks or some headers and things like that where you will say, geez, that's really increased?
I struggle to watch football, codes now, because I'm sitting there with my beer and just going, And I think, Don, you referred to American scientists. We had Chris Nowinski out here the week before, and so he's obviously ex Ivy League football and professional wrestler as well. Struggled with concussion for many years, so was able to take him out to a club football match, Australian rules football match with Seaford Football Club versus. I think it was Edithvale Aspendale, and it was as gritty as you could get it. There was that they all had portables to change in. There was no grandstand. It was wet. It was horrible. There were fights in the first quarter, and Chris was just like, I cannot see how any of these codes cannot say that there's a CTE risk, and it's the same with soccer as well. You just see it time and time again, and. As I said at the start when we talk about Heather, it's the first case, but it's certainly not going to be the last.
Alan, are we at a stage now where the science is in? You've been doing it for a number of years. Your American counterparts have been doing it for a number of years. Okay, different sports. But is the science in? Is the science consistent? And what's the science telling us?
Yeah, it certainly is consistent. And we used a criteria called the Bradford Hill criteria. So the Bradford Hill criteria actually was the criteria that helped determine that there was a link between smoking and lung cancers, and throat cancer, any sort of cancer relating to smoking. Because what we hear all the time is that, well, there's not enough evidence. You really need to be doing, and I'm going to sound again really nerdy here, you need to be doing prospective randomized controlled trials that you need to really determine if there's going to be a link here. And that's quite convenient, because if and there are prospective trials going on right now, studies going on right now that are going to be 40 years from now that we're going to find out. We don't have time to find out. So we looked at the data, and again, this was with Michael Buckland and other colleagues around the world, including Chris Nowinski, who led the study. And we use this criteria, and there are 9 sections to the criteria that looks at animal studies, human studies, geographical locations, different type of experiences, epidemiological, like it's this really strict criteria. And we showed across all criteria that if you keep getting repetitive head trauma, your risk of CTE increases significantly. So we have the evidence there.
Alan, you won't say it, but we'd say it, but it seems to me that, Gil McLaughlin, but now Andrew Dillon and Richard Goyder should get off their arse and do something about this.
Yes, absolutely.
This sounds like this is now becoming time critical.
We need we need voices like yourself to help amplify what people like myself and Michael and others have been saying for a number of years now. And it's certainly not trying to be a sport killer. We know that there are benefits of playing sport and physical activity. All we're asking is to try and reduce the risk of repetitive head trauma, modifying these sports for kids, maybe trying to get coaches to think a little bit smarter in their training practices. Not every training session you have to smash each other at training, because that's the way it's always been done. Train smarter. We see this time and time again when a coach is more innovative in their training practices and it results to success. Everyone else goes, "Oh, what did he or she do? What happened?" And we've seen this with the Harlequins in the UK. They changed their training practices because what they were finding is that their players were getting smashed during the week, with a lot of physical hits because of these instrumental mouthguards giving them some data that they then sort of structured their training practices, and they won the premiership.
It seems to me, Alan, that AFL and possibly NRL can adapt the way the game's played to reduce head injuries, and certainly, as Mark was saying, get the kids not too competitive at a too early age. I would have thought that gridiron and boxing are unsustainable sports of their very nature.
Yeah, well, I was actually quite surprised with the federal parliamentary inquiry into concussion and repeated head trauma in sport when boxing did get interviewed by the senators, and I didn't realise that they do full contact boxing from about 13 years of age.
Yep.
And that scared me a lot, because I really thought that full contact only started at 18, and that was a bit of a shock to me, because we know that also from and this is in Thailand with Muay Thai, and I know that I don't know whether it's an excuse or not, but a lot of it in Thailand is to try and get families themselves out of poverty, and this talks into a whole social cultural aspect of this that we haven't got to yet. But scientists in Thailand have looked at kids who do Muay Thai versus kids that don't, and they're 10 points lower on their IQ testing at a similar age. And so it does lead to cognitive impairments. And I just find it hard to ratify that we're wanting to talk about, good health, physical health, mental health, emotional health through sport, which I absolutely agree with. But at the same time, we're allowing our kids to have their brains bashed.
All right, Alan, we might get you out of here just on this last one. And
Sure.
Both John and Paul talked about head trauma. Just to clarify for the people who are watching, when we say head trauma, we're not talking about the severe belt across the head or one that gives you concussion. Head trauma means what?
Yeah, well, you look at when you're watching footy and you see those bumps, and the player goes down, they get back up and they run on again, and then they get tackled and they get thrown down again and up. So it is a significant impact, but it's not one to show any signs or symptoms. You don't see the classic signs or symptoms. Conversely, it's not, and we've had a few people quite disrespectfully say, "Oh, well, you could get a subconcussion driving in the car and you have to brake." That's, to me, completely dismissing what a subconcussion is, and that came from someone I can't mention, or else I'll get sued for defamation. But what we did say it on a radio show once. So they are these very, very distinct. The big clashes that you see, and everyone goes ooh, and then they keep running on, and oh wow, he or she was just so courageous, and they're so brave, and they're the ones that add up over time. And we're talking about probably in a 20-year career, 30,000 of these hits. This is what we're talking about, not the 6 or 5 or 2 or 1 concussions that certainly have an overlapping effect, but we're talking about tens of thousands of hits. They talked about Mike Webster, the first person diagnosed with CTE by Bennett Omalu in 2005. That kind of really set off this thing. And there were estimations over his whole career, because he started so young, that he had 50,000 hits to his brain. So this is why it's like tobacco. The more you smoke, the greater your risk.
All right, Alan, thanks very much for joining us here today. We really appreciate it. And as far as Sportsfan Radio is concerned, it's very important to get the message out about CTE and what sporting organisations should be doing to safeguard the health of their participants.
No, thanks very much for having me. And if anyone really you can help us, fundraise or create awareness, either, us at the Brain Bank, which is brainbank.org.au, or we've also set up a charity called the Concussion Legacy Foundation Australia, which is part of the global Concussion Legacy Foundation as well. So if anyone is going to be doing a run for Melbourne Marathon and they'd like to try and raise some money, have a think about us rather than the usual charities.
Fantastic.
Would be a very good donation indeed. Thanks very much, Alan.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Doctor.
Cheers.
Cheers. See ya.
All right, Paul, let's go to rugby league and discuss state of origin. I know that's a subject you probably don't want to talk about, given that the Blues are 2-0 down and no chance of really redemption at all this season. I saw that Nick Tedeschi was asking for the head of Brad Fittler on a platter. That hasn't been served yet, but I wouldn't imagine that he'll last too long after game 3.
No, but it's almost that they don't want to make an admission that he hasn't been coaching well. Elton John sung it best once. I guess that's why they call it the Blues. It seems every year that I watch these Blues with great expectations. And I think Freddie Fittler's lost 5 of his last 6 games. So there wouldn't be many coaches in world sports, given that there's only 3 played a year, that would be hanging on to their jobs with that type of record. So I think there needs to be a change. But the question is, who's it going to be? I mean, you're talking about Craig Bellamy being taken back. He doesn't want to do it because he'd be coaching. He's against his Storm players, and that's completely understandable. You might go with the rookie, but I think with Queensland, they got very lucky with Billy Slater, who's a once-in-a-generation prodigy, and he stepped up and coached these Queensland Blues superbly. I'm looking forward to game 3. I'm interested in what you said about no chance of redemption. People have to understand, I've been questioned on this many times, why you play a game 3 when it's already 2-0. Perhaps only in rugby league that happens, but I can assure you that there'll be a lot of feeling out there on Wednesday night, and Queensland will be going all out to stop New South Wales winning a third. They've added a guy I'm looking forward to seeing, even though he's a Queenslander, Corey Horsburgh. He's built like a brick toilet with a head like a robber's dog. He's perfect for Origin. He's going to come in as a very exciting player. He's come in for Reece Walsh. Between him and Jerome Luai, there's been more trash talking than a UFC octagon. So it's a bit of a shame that there's been a lot of this trash talking in the Origin arena, but perhaps it's the way of the world when you see what's happening in the Ashes series, all this trash talking and carry on. I'm looking forward to game 3, and I think New South Wales may just get it right. We'll see what happens Wednesday night, as will, I'm sure, still a few million other people in Australia still watching.
Paul, on that, Luai performance in the second game was absolutely pathetic, wasn't it? Munster just absolutely killed him. He tried to get into the thing, and Addo-Carr again jumping over the top, trying to punch from behind. Again, where during the game he just missed tackles going through. Surely these guys, with their trash talking and all that, all you got to do is just have a look at their performances, and maybe they're the reasons why New South Wales are down zip 2.
Well, Luai, I think I was reading about it before, boombox culture. It's not about the music but it's all about this trash talking and bro and all this stuff and carry on. I think they need to get back to old school football to beat Queensland if we're any chance up there. New South Wales has introduced what I'm sure we've discussed on the show, one of the best names in Australian sport, Bradman Best. He's come out of absolute left field to be named to start for New South Wales, not as a reserve or not as an interchange, to start. He is built like a boxer. He looks like a boxer, but he doesn't go on with all the trash talk. He'll be very good on Wednesday night. I'm looking forward to seeing Bradman Best, and I'm sure I've tipped him before to score tries for his beloved Newcastle Knights. He'll be great to watch. They've recalled Regan Campbell-Gillard, who was one of the best forwards for Australia when we won the World Cup, yet stunningly didn't make the New South Wales team till Game 3. Jake Trbojevic, one of our spiritual leaders, is back as well. Cody Walker's the most important addition. He's been playing the lights out for the Rabbitohs, and we saw last night, with no disrespect to your Dogs, Professor, but Cody Walker there, South probably could have won that game or should have won that game. So I'm looking forward to Wednesday night, and I actually think New South Wales might win up there. Call me a fool.
Oh, no, we won't
Well,
do
it's in
that.
New South Wales, isn't it, Paul?
Game 3. Oh, yeah. Sorry, New South Wales. It's in
So
Sydney.
they would be, like, their record in New South Wales is quite good. So surely they'll be expected to win at home, wouldn't they?
We're outsiders with the bookies, perhaps because they've finally realised this is a much better Queensland team. But you just have to wonder subconsciously whether Queensland will be all in. As I said, they've lost a few players. I still think that New South Wales, they probably should, or they should win this game, but we'll see.
Well, should Addo-Carr and Luai, should we expect better performances than what they've dished up so far?
Well, Luai's out. He's been overlooked. Reece Walsh has been suspended. So you've got Cody Walker there in place of Luai. A lot of people called for Cody Walker to be there from the start, but Fittler went with the Panthers connection, perhaps being a Panthers junior himself, and it just did not work in this state of origin, this Panthers connection, to overcome what is a magical Queensland side, and I'll admit that.
Paul, Bradman Best. I have a theory that people should be able to sue their parents for the names that they're given. If you see what I see in court, some of the names are just cruel and unusual punishment. I can't think of a worse way to burden a child by calling him Bradman Best. I mean, he's expected to do well, isn't he?
Well, he is, and obviously his dad was a former player as well. So yeah, so he's knows the game. He's just a very good player, and he's come from the juniors, and he's played New South Wales representative for junior level. He won't be fazed by this at all. He's a perfect selection to go back to old school football, as opposed to this layering around boombox culture. I don't want to use it again, but that's apparently what's taken over the team. And we need to get back to old school footy. Regan Campbell-Gillard looks like he stepped out of the 1930s with that moustache, so he'll be perfect old school as well. And as I said, Jake Trbojevic is probably the spiritual leader of the Blues. So it's all looking good for the Blues.
So if you had to have a guess at the final score, Paul, what do you think it'll be?
24-14. I actually think we might put a few people back in their place. And, of course, it'll help to maintain interest in the series, and everyone will look forward to next year.
Yeah, Paul, it'll be an odd feeling when it's happened before. The side that's won the series has actually lost the third game, and they get presented with the shield for winning it. It's kind of an odd feeling, isn't it?
It would be. It won't be the warmest reception either there for the Queenslanders stepping up on stage at Sydney Arena there.
Yeah. Should they presented it after the second game?
Yeah, there is some argument for that. That's probably something they should consider. But they might argue that would take away from Game 3 if it's already officially declared over. But of course it's over. But whether you want the formalities there, it's a good point. You wouldn't have wanted that though. Let's say they won it in Sydney. You wouldn't want it there being presented after Game 2 either. So it's more about the venue, I think, than the timing.
Paul, there's been some suggestion that Joey Johns will be the next coach of the Blues. If he was appointed, what would your thoughts be on that?
I think he'd be good with maybe a coaching advisor there. Fittler's had Brandy Alexander. The two of them will go with a loss in Game 3. I think they might go anyway. I think Johns would be good if he had someone guiding him there, even a Phil Gould in the background. Just to advise, the same way Billy Slater surrounded himself with Cameron Smith, Jonathan Thurston, some absolute greats of the game. I think as a rookie coach, you need someone there to guide you as a mentor. But he'd be a good choice. He's got a good football brain, if that's not an oxymoron.
Paul, round 19 started on Thursday night. West Tigers lowering their colours to the Sharks. It's been the season from hell for Wests.
It has been, and you'd have to wonder what Nico Hines has to do. His card's obviously been marked in Brad Fittler's corner. He was played for about 10 minutes in game 1, not picked for game 2 and not picked for game 3. So it's been a season from hell for the Tigers. The only team worse has been the Dragons. They showed some fight against the Raiders, but it's going to be a fight to the bottom for the Tigers and the Dragons to see who gets the wooden spoon. But can I give you a left field prediction here, Professor? And I'm happy to have egg on the face. I had an omelette for breakfast. Do you want to hear 2 left field grand final combatants?
Yes, please.
The Raiders to win it for Jack Whiten, which might be ironic given he chose to leave, and the Cowboys, who were written off. We might have put the Sportsfan Stan red pen through the Cowboys perhaps a while back, but they've gone on a Port Adelaide type run, and they are my new grand final participants. I think that's the only show in the world that would give that prediction.
All right.
Professor, can I say something on that?
Yes, go on.
And I'm not on mushrooms, and there's nothing in my tea this morning. That's a left field prediction. You'll get a big price on it too, Gelding.
Well, Paul, I've followed a prediction from earlier in the year and hopped on board the Rabbitohs. Following the expert in Sportsfan Radio on rugby league, wasn't the Rabbitohs your number 1 pick?
It was, and that 2 billion Chinese year of the rabbit. So I think they've got a case of the myxomatosis. They've lost 5 of the last 7, and I'm worried that we've peaked too soon. So
how's my small wager looking at the moment?
Well, just keep it on ice. That's all. I wouldn't throw it out. We've set it alight, but we need to find something pretty quickly. There's only 8 rounds to go. We're not doing too well, and the origin period now, we're getting some games that we should have won. So not ideal. We're still up there with the traditional bookies, but this corner, I'm not a traditional odds maker, as you know, Gelding.
Yes, and the odds are continuing to grow. I think I've taken well and truly unders.
Yeah, it might get back there for you. I hope it does. But I'll give you a bet very shortly that you might get some money back into the tank.
So, Paul, I'm glad you mentioned the Raiders. I wanted to talk to you about what I would call a statistical anomaly. And we love anomalies on Sportsfan Radio.
You're talking to one.
The Raiders currently sit 4th. They've won 11 and lost 6. The big thing that I can see from the table is they are the only team in the 8 with a points differential in the negative, and they're minus 56. Doesn't that tell us something about how brittle their defence might be?
I haven't seen a worse defence since Ivan Milat, but what it is, they're scoring more points than they're
I don't know what.
A lot of that comes. I want to go to a team that's competitive. I thought the team might turn on Jack Whiten when he said, "I want to go to a better team," but they've actually been resilient since.
Do you see them finishing top 4?
I see them making the grand final and playing the Cowboys. So, yeah.
All right. Can we put a red line through the Eels after they were demolished by the Warriors 46-10?
Not yet. They're missing Mitchell Moses.
Not yet. Not yet. All right. Yes, go on. I'm waiting to hear why not.
I've got a Mark Fiorenzi about me and up on the fence today. I'm usually a bit more assertive, but Mitchell Moses, the key. He's away on state of origin duty, so just keep your orange pen in hand for the moment.
All right. Now, last night we joked about it earlier, Paul. The Bulldogs 36, the Rabbitohs 32. Can we see the Bulldogs going on a run and maybe making the 8?
No.
Here am I expecting another Fiorenzi? No, that definitely a categoric no.
The Rabbitohs had more men down than Saving Private Ryan. So, yes, it was a good win, but we were seriously undermanned. So, Professor, I'm happy for you, but let's look at next week.
All right. Well, this afternoon, the only game today at 4:05 p.m. It's a must-win game for both teams, Titans versus Dolphins. Hopefully it's entertaining. It could be bad, but hopefully it'll be good. What are your thoughts on that game, Paul?
So get your pen out here, Gelding. I've got a tip for you. I think the Dolphins will win this.
Poised.
Redcliffe Dolphins as outsiders will win. And there's a player they have called Valance Taware. Get on him to do everything but the opening tributes. So I think he'll score a few times. Valance Taware, he's a freak of a player. And with all the 4 outs, the Titans have pretty much lost their entire spine. They're playing a better brand of football. The Dolphins, some say, are done. If they lose today, they will be done. And that's why I think Wayne Bennett, the master coach, up against the rookies Titans coach, will get enough out of these Dolphins to win.
Separate bets or
matter for yourself.
As
always, a matter for yourself. You can roll it into one, like a Chinese omelette. You can do whatever you want, but a combination. I just think they'll win.
I like the parlays.
Yeah, well, they'll parlay at that together. So Valance to get a hat trick into the Dolphins, and you can thank me later.
Okay. I'll recover some of that Rabbitohs money.
That's it.
Gamble responsibly.
And your thoughts on a final score, Paul?
Well, they could put on more together than Steve Smith has in the Ashes. So it could be like, I think, 36-28 in Dolphins.
Okay. Now, Paul, we must say that the NRLW starts on the 22nd of July. So for our next program, we'll be wanting you to give us your countdown on how the NRLW ladder will be at the end of the season. That's just giving you
a great competition with the teams added. There's a lot of interest in it. They're managing it well, and it can be a signpost, I think, for other sports as to how you can run a very successful women's competition. I'm looking forward to it.
And Professor, I should point out that Paul's at a zinger count level of 11.5. As you know, we give a half for one he's already said some other time, but 11.5 is one off his record. I just don't want to put the pressure on.
Well, and still 8 minutes of the show to go.
That's what I'm saying. He could go nuts here. As long as you know, you only get a half if you said it before. But
I didn't know that.
John, the odds are way too short for him to bypass it today. He's coming off a long break.
Well,
he's been storing them up.
Yeah.
Here's a topic that could get him going, and Gelding, it'll get you going. Let's talk cricket because the Ashes, we're now into the 3rd test. Before we look at this test, Gelding, the Bairstow run out stumping in the final innings of the 2nd test. What were your thoughts on people saying that Australia had abandoned the true traditions of cricket by affecting a dismissal like that?
Look, Professor, I'd say, it didn't look good. Personally, I would have thought that you may have given him a warning about that, but then to hear some of and what I'll say is absolute crap that's come out about it, it was definitely out. The ball wasn't dead. In cricket, like the ball's normally almost alive until the umpires called it dead. So, just to do what he did. Hypocritical is probably the word that comes from it. The English coach, when he was the keeper for New Zealand, has done that on 3 occasions during his test career. Bairstow had done it to Marcus Labuschagne, actually in the same test, tried to do it. So look, it happens quite regularly, Professor. And then to say the spirit of the game, well, the spirit of the game is when you nick the ball and it goes, you normally walk, Professor. I don't see too many of the Poms actually walking. Broad, who's got a comment for everything. He notoriously hit it to first slip and refused to walk.
Gelding, didn't the spirit of the game die as long ago as W.G. Grace when he was once bowled out and refused to leave the pitch because he said to the bowler, they've come to watch me bat, not to watch you bowl. Now,
Exactly.
It goes back 150 years, and it hasn't got much better ever since. So
No.
we just lose our collective minds when it comes to the Ashes, don't we?
Oh,
Everybody
look,
just becomes more silly than they otherwise would be.
and it's not bashing or anything like that. To use the spirit of the game, well, it only seems to affect the spirit of the game when it affects England. Yeah, to be like the Mitchell Stark catch off Duckett.
Yeah.
You know, he caught the ball.
Yeah.
Then he put his hands out. They're the rules. Like, remember, the ICC, Australia don't make the rules. The ICC make the rules, which is predominantly dominated by India and English. So, you know, if they don't think it's there, change the rule. And things like that.
Isn't it great seeing that Charles Fortescue Smythes in the MCC giving the with a few sherries on board, giving the Australian players a bit of what if, and apparently the word convict came out.
Yes.
I mean, talk about losing your mind, really.
The cheating convicts.
That's right.
You know, look, I don't think you could really take offence at being called a cheating convict, could you? Like, I hope we haven't been too precious in it all, and that, look, it got the crowds going. Geez, I'm sure you've heard worse in Bay 13 at the MCG over the years. So, look, is that an overreaction? Well, I think so. Were they? Geez, they're members. They have their say. They appreciate their cricket. They appreciate the Australian side, and I heard all the players say it's one of the best places to go because they're so close to everyone. So I hope it hasn't ruined that. The cricket has actually been fantastic.
Fabulous.
The captaincy, I wonder sometimes the tactics we're employing, especially bowling at Stokes. I have discussed this with Professor, you know, the theory of the 2020 bowling, you know, we'll bowl a slow bouncer outside the off stump. Well, if someone's slogging the ball and pulling away to the wickets, the old theory used to bowl, you bowl at the bottom of middle stump and hopefully hit off stump or that. But that theory just didn't go away, and we've seen what Ben Stokes has done in the last two innings he's had against Australia. And with only 224 required,
I should get it.
I've got to say it's in their favour. But John, I would say that every innings has been lower, you know. So they only made 237 in the first day. Their batting hasn't been that strong. So you take Stokes out, you get him early.
Hang on, just don't forget Joe Root. I mean, he's a decent batsman.
Sensational bat, but
some talent there.
But obviously, like, they're the two wickets that you've got to get.
Yep.
The two main ones. But then again, look, they haven't. Joe Root hasn't been performing, and you know Cummings has got him a few times now. And going back, and I was talking to Professor. The Poms are blaming the cheating and all this for losing. It's their own performance catching. Australia made 400 in both the first test and the second test in the first innings. Now, if their bowling and catching hasn't been up to scratch, that's why they lost the first two tests. You know, then the third test wasn't much better with the catching. We made 263 and they gave us 3 or 4 easy chances, and that they have come from, in this test, Bairstow again, you know, not up to it as far as the keeper goes, but plays because he's a batsman. And Joe Root put down 2 relatively simple catches at in slip. So, yeah, let's wait and see. But I would imagine the Poms would start strong favourites tonight, but 3 quick wickets can change that around.
I was going to just say, cheating convicts, isn't that what we call a tautology? Most of them did something wrong, didn't they? Anyway.
Yeah.
Hang on. Sorry, the record's just been read.
Like, sorry, I'm married to my husband. I mean, cheating convict. They did something to get on the boat. Anyway.
Anyway, look, it's could you imagine how hurt and how painful it would be to be called a cheating convict? I think I've been called a lot worse on both sporting fields, football and cricket.
I often get called Peter, and I say, if that's the worst thing I get called this week, I'll take it.
Yeah, exactly. So, look, I think this Ashes series has been fantastic. With India, Australia, England, India are the three best test sides at the moment. It's been a fantastic series. We've won the World Test against India. We then won the first two series of the Ashes. So, Australia have got to be pretty happy with their performances. And even though we might be underdogs going into tonight, we're certainly not out of it.
Gelding, there is another Ashes series going on at the moment, the women's series. Do you support the name being retained as the Ashes for the women's series?
John, I've got a view that, yes, I do think it should be. I think the Australian women's cricket team has been the best side of any sport in the world for close on 4 years. They have got a fantastic record. I was talking to my wife about it, and she was surprised that I said that. But and then they lost. Then they lost to one of the one dayers. That when as a world class team against world class performers, just an incredible record.
I agree with you, but disagree about the conclusion. I agree that they are a superb team, and therefore they don't need to be patronised by just being another little tack on to the men's game and say, "Oh, we'll give you the name of the Ashes as well." I think they deserve their own name for this series. That's my point.
Oh yeah. Oh, look, as you said, like we do the Ashes over there every 4 years. Maybe the women's can do the Ashes over there on the alternative second year, and have their own thing. Like that's only.
No, it is every second year because they come here. So,
no, that's what I mean. But they go to England and you do the alternative. That's what I think I'd be the best. But look, I think they've deserved in their own right. I personally looked at it when they called it I didn't find it degrading to them in any way, and anything like that. And I think a lot of people do actually respect the record of the Australian women's side. Like you think the teams they're playing against, how many? India, it's that hard to get into the men's side, and you become a thing. Well, the same applies for their women competition, and even in the IPL now, the Australian women are so well feted with that. They're the highest paid players, in that competition, and perform well. So, look, I can see what you mean by. It might be degrading for them, but I certainly wouldn't consider it that. And I think they're fully deserved the right to be called the Ashes series. I think they should be playing more cricket over there rather than one test. Have a 3-test series or something.
All right, Gelding, we might wrap up this program with your tips.
Yes, Professor. Look, I sent a quick text out. I thought Mick Price could win the first 3 races at Pakenham Synthetic today, and gave a tip of Offensive Charm in the first. However, Offensive Charm finished 4th, but Mick Price did win it with Lace Maker. So a couple of tips for today, if you're interested in having bets. At Pakenham, race 2, number 10, Devouch, Price and Childs, around about $4. Race 3, number 3, Novas, again, Price and Childs, around about the $2.50, and follow that in with race 5, number 6, Dream Witnesses. Katie Heffel's riding it, who was in fine form yesterday at Caulfield. We also have races over in Werribee, Professor. Maybe just 2 quick bets there. Race 4, number 2, Craft Star, into race 8, number 9, Columby Dior. Amar Eustace, Ben Allen in the last, race 8, number 9. And that may be the bet of the day, I think.
All right, Gelding, thanks very much for those thoughts on best bets today. Gentlemen, the next program will be on the 23rd of July in a fortnight, and I can announce that Mark Fiorenti,
Hey,
the person who sits on the fence the most of any commentator I've known, he will be back for that show talking about the Women's World Cup, and we're certainly looking forward to him being back on the program.
Splinters is back.
Yep, he's back.
All right, Professor. I might have to miss that one.
he's going to predict 16 draws, Professor. You what?
All right, gentlemen, thanks for your participation today in the program. It was terrific to have Dr. Pearce on to talk about CTE and concussion, and have a very good Sunday afternoon.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guy.
Thanks.